I don't think that we should be paying taxes philosophically. I think we should have private property rights. So you should own your property whenever you buy it instead of paying property taxes and renting from the government forever. But, there are steps to get to that direction, of course, too. Hello, welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. It's a pleasure to have you with me. We've got a lot to talk about. In this episode, I'm going to discuss the recent momentum in the states to push much pro-growth, prosperity generating policies across the country. I mean, this is really what we need. We know the federal government takes their time and Congress takes their time, but states can act, and they can act quickly oftentimes. So there's a lot of things that we need to go through. And I'm hopeful that once the states really start to see momentum and move things across the country on pro-growth reforms, that Congress will see this and start to act. We've seen that back when the welfare reforms, before the 1996 reforms at the federal level, states were already moving in that direction. We've started to see that now with sustainable budgeting moving in that direction. We've seen tax reforms. And so I think that this is important not only for the state governments, but for federal and local government officials as well. So we've got a lot to talk about. So let's get straight into it. Number one, spend less, prosper more. That's been my main mantra lately, and I'm going to keep using it all the time, because if we spend less, we don't have to tax less. We don't have to regulate less. We can get government out of our way. That's really what we need. So look, sustainable budgeting is crucial for protecting taxpayers and fostering economic growth. Many states, like the federal government, risk higher taxes due to unsustainable spending. By implementing strict spending limits, states can control unnecessary growth, maintain fiscal responsibility, and promote a thriving economy. What I've been able to do is to work with multiple groups like Americans for Tax Reform and the Club for Growth Foundation, along with a number of other state think tanks across the country, to say, look, sustainable budgeting, a strict spending limit, like has been used in the Swiss debt break, other countries. Also, Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights, I think, is the kind of the gold standard here, although it needs to be improved upon as it's been weakened over time. But at least it sets the foundation for a good steps in the right direction. So what do you really need for sustainable budgeting? Well, one is, for a strict spending limit, you need comprehensive coverage. The spending limit needs to apply to the entire budget, including state funds and all funds. That would be the ideal scenario. Or at least all state funds, you exclude federal funds. But look, some will say they don't have control over federal funds, but they do. I mean, you could change up your Medicaid programs. You can reject those dollars. It's just that it's politically difficult, almost impossible to do that. But you really can, as a legislature, make substantial changes that will also change how much your federal funding comes in. Across the states, what you'll find is that about a third of the budget that they are spending are federal funds. And remember, as taxpayers, and ultimately I'm trying to remember the taxpayer any way I can, is that it doesn't matter whether it's local spending or state spending or federal spending or wherever those quote unquote funds are coming from. It's coming from who? The taxpayer. Nothing is free. Government spending isn't free. And it's coming from us out of the private sector. And so it really should cover the entire budget, but at least state funds would be a good step in the right direction. Number two, as part of a sustainable budget and strict spending limit, is spending cap based on population growth plus inflation. Now, I don't look at population growth plus inflation as being a target. It is a maximum budget growth rate. One good measure that I think works well, that's looked at by the Sustainable Budget, Americans for Tax Reform, and also by the Club for Growth Foundation that I've worked on, it uses a 3-year average rate of the state population growth plus change CPI inflation. Other measures of inflation could be used. You could use different state population measures, I guess. But at the end of the day, it should be a 3-year moving average or something like that to smooth out those, cycles of high volatility up and down, especially after we've seen the last few years under the Biden administration and the Fed printing too much money, creating all this inflation, is that it really helps to set a check on the average taxpayer's ability to pay for government spending, right? You have more state population, so more people can pay into taxes. You have inflation, which is historically tied to wage growth, although that hasn't been the case as much the last couple of years, but historically it has been. And so if you have higher wages, then that means more people can pay into taxes that way, but through through consumption and other things, because ultimately I think we should get rid of income taxes and move to sales taxes. But I think that's another big part of this. So the first two parts of this cover as much of the budget as you can and use the spending limit based on population growth plus inflation as a maximum, not a target. Number three out of that, though, is that you need a supermajority requirement for any exceptions, whether it be natural disasters, whether it be recessions, or whatever it is. The focus should be on cutting spending during those times so that more money stays in families' pockets and people's pockets, not within government. So there should be a supermajority. A 2/3 vote would be ideal, or maybe something even higher. But that's really what you want to make sure is that there is a strict amount to take exceptions to the strict spending limit. Number four part of that is you want to prioritize surpluses, what I call surplus buy downs. So any money that goes above the spending limit goes to reduce taxes. You want to reduce income tax rates, school district property tax rates, if the state mainly funds that, sales tax rates, whatever it is, you want the rates to go down, and then that will allow for you to have more growth, more incentives, and everything else. So what's been happening across the states as far as sustainable budgeting? Well, Michigan has an opportunity to pass a sustainable Michigan budget that they've been working on at the Mackinac Center. The responsible Kansas budget and the Kansas Policy Institute, they're working on that as well. And so these are good reforms. I think Texas also must pass a sort of conservative Texas budget or a frozen Texas budget, because there are some major spending problems in Texas, of all places. And so I think that's another key area. There are a lot of other states that are moving to the sustainable budget process. And I should mention that, if you look at the period of the last decade, through 2023, and I'm updating these numbers for the American Tax Reform on their website, atr.org/budget project. Over that decade, you had a situation where 12 states either had their spending below population growth plus inflation for the entire budget, the all funds budget, or in state funds. So, we're moving already in this direction. More than a quarter of the states are already moving in the sustainable budget direction. That's why I think that we don't need a structural balance or other types of spending limit situations, because no other state uses those, okay, for one. And I think the focus is not on the spending, because that is the ultimate burden of government. So many red states are moving in this direction. We have also seen some states moving to what, Trump's DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, including Texas, Kansas, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Oklahoma. There's a lot of them. South Carolina is up there as well. So I think these task forces are important. I think it's optimal to have it independent. That way it's outside of government. That way you don't have the wolf guarding the hen house. But if we can start getting groups and committees and others to start looking at waste, fraud, and abuse and exposing these excessive spending items, we'll be in a much better direction for the future across the country. So number two, though, on big policy initiatives that are going on, tax reform to champion taxpayers. Many states are exploring tax cuts to benefit residents and stimulate economic growth. However, sustainable budgeting must allow families and businesses to retain more earnings, but controlling spending is essential, of course, for long-term fiscal stability. Momentum is building across the U.S. to reduce property taxes, income taxes, and so much more. In fact, some are even considering eliminating property taxes or eliminating income taxes, which I think are both good steps in the right direction. If I had to order them, I would say you would need to eliminate income taxes first. But for those states that don't have income taxes, you really need to either go over after sales taxes or school district property taxes with the state money. And then local governments should reduce their own property taxes. I don't think that we should be paying taxes philosophically. I think we should have private property rights. So you should own your property whenever you buy it, instead of paying property taxes and renting from the government forever. But, there are steps to get to that direction, of course, too. We do have some things going on in Texas, for example, on property tax relief. It's Senate Bill 4, which was unanimously approved by the Texas Senate recently, which advances property tax reform of about $3 billion for raising the homestead exemption from $100,000 to $140,000. I mean, they keep moving in this direction for homestead exemptions to help families, right? But I don't really like this approach. It's picking winners and losers, and it's picking the families who have homes that are homeowners, right? They're homestead, over those families who that have property that are not homestead or that are renting right? Or that have businesses. And so I think the better way to do this is to compress the school district the school district M&O property tax rates. And doing that reduces taxes for all families, for all individuals across the state, instead of picking winners and losers. And so I'm hopeful that what I've heard so far from the Texas House is that they'll move more towards compression, limiting spending, using it for reducing the rates of about $3.5 billion instead of the $3 billion in homestead exemptions in Texas, or in the Texas Senate. And so that's something we want to watch. All right. There's also movement in Texas to reduce the levy limits from 3.5% maybe to 0. I think that would be ideal, but something lower, because we're seeing substantial increases in property taxes across the great state of Texas. Iowa also has an opportunity to cap property tax levies at 2% growth per year. North Dakota is looking at limiting annual property tax increases to 3%. Indiana's SB1 will reduce property taxes for elderly and disabled veterans. Kentucky, Governor Andy Beshear recently signed a bipartisan bill to lower the state's income tax rate from 4% to 3.5%. Colorado's SB 138, this year's tax reduction to 4.25%, will become the new baseline for future cuts. And look, we've got more than 20 states now that are looking at either having zero income taxes, which is great, or getting to flat income taxes. We're already moving to a situation where more than half the states will be either at zero income taxes or a flat rate. That would be a great opportunity for the federal government to also reduce their income taxes and get to a flat rate as well. And so I think these are good steps in the right direction. We'll see what happens at the end of the day, but these are the things that I'm watching right now. The number 3 big policy to talk about is that school choice empowers students and families. That's really what we want. The current government school monopoly fails many families, particularly those in low-income households. Universal Education Savings Accounts, ESAs, would allow families to allocate education funds to schools or programs that best meet their children's needs, expanding access to better educational opportunities. This choice helps disadvantaged students escape underperforming schools, reducing cycles of poverty and crime, while also fostering stronger, more prosperous communities. And what we've seen is that many states are moving in this direction. Tennessee recently became what could be considered the 13th state to adopt universal school choice package, which is a great step in the right direction. And, I'm a little bit skeptical that some of these 13 are fully universal, meaning that every child is eligible to receive this. It's voluntary, so you can opt in or out, but that you can also get every one of them the dollars that they need in this ESA. A lot of them are putting in a lottery that they're only allocating so much money, and then certain people can get it, like certain students can get it, or they've just focused on those that are disabled or low income kids first. I mean, this should be for everyone. Whoever wants to use these funds, which are taxpayer funds, right, should be able to choose the education services that they want to receive. And look, at the end of the day, I think we should privatize all the schools. But while most constitutions have said the state will somehow provide education to some extent, I think while that's in place, education savings accounts are the best opportunity to do so. It's not a voucher because it's not from one institution to another like a school voucher. Money goes to the parents, and the parents get to decide how that's used. And there are going to be checks and balances. I understand that, but we should let it be as little regulation as possible, so that way we can get the best outcomes possible as well. Texas recently passed school choice bill, Senate Bill 2, which is the school choice in general is a top priority for Governor Abbott this legislative session. I'm also hearing that the House may even have a better school choice bill that could be released soon. I'll believe it when I see it. Okay, I'm being cautiously optimistic. But some of the things about SB 2 are really good in the sense that everyone is eligible. But again, it allocates money based on certain income levels, disability, and also uses a lottery for 20% of the funding of about $1 billion. So the first round could be about nearly 100,000 kids, which would be the largest start of any school. The problem is that we've already got 12, 13 other states that are doing this. We should know how to do this. It's a matter of getting it done. And I think what I would like to see is for the state to fund it based on the need, based on the demand. And let's see what happens. And also don't, hold harmless the government school system. If you have a monopoly system and you're trying to add competition and you keep funding the monopoly, you're not going to get the benefits and the overall improved results that you otherwise would have. This is one reason why I think we should move to universal ESAs and get rid of school finance formulas and all the other bad finance systems that we have and just focus on ESAs. If we did that in Texas and moved from the $17,000 per child to $12,000 for an ESA for each one, because remember, a lot of the government school money goes to bureaucracy and bloat and all the other stuff. Whereas if we can have a more efficient system, we could actually save $20 billion a year in Texas if we head in that direction. North Carolina recently passed House Bill 1540 with one remaining ESA bill in the Senate, which is SB 2400. So we'll see what happens there. Idaho is being pushed by President Trump to pass school choice bill HB 93, which is awaiting a Senate vote. Mississippi is having some troubles. From what I understand, there's a school choice bill there that's currently stalled in the House. So hopefully they can get that moving. And South Dakota senators voted against the third school choice finance bill proposed this session. So we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts across the country, but ultimately we need school choice. The number 4 big policy that I'm watching is reduce regulatory restraints to unleash business success. Look, reducing government-imposed obstacles is essential to unlocking opportunities and fostering job creation. By cutting unnecessary taxes and regulations, states can empower individuals. These reforms offer immediate relief and lay the foundation for long-term prosperity and economic growth. Reform should focus on eliminating burdensome business regulations that hinder expansion and innovation, particularly those affecting industries like AI and technology. Occupational licensing should also be limited or eliminated to situations that truly protect the public at large and remove outdated or unnecessary regulations, ensuring that only those with a clear public safety purpose remain in place. And I think those are few and far between if there are any, okay? There's Texas's HB 1709, which is an artificial intelligence regulation bill. It would impose the harshest state level restrictions on AI nationwide. And it's just a terrible bill overall. I hope that there's going to be some improvements with it. From what I've heard, there will be other bills filed that will be in a better situation, like what Utah passed recently. It also follows the ALEC model legislation. That's more of a direction we should be going, where if there is any regulation, it's on the use at the end of the process, right? Like the final users and what they're doing versus regulation on how AI should be generated, modeled, and ultimately used or started and built. If we do that, we will stifle innovation. We will stifle the tech sector at large. And that is what's bad about HB 1709 in Texas. Utah's SB 226 narrows the scope of business required to disclose when customers interact with generative AI. West Virginia, if you think about occupational licensing, West Virginia has been doing a lot of good stuff on this. The NE Regulatory Research Center is tracking occupational licensing in all 50 states, providing annual snapshots of licensing requirements for policymakers. Be sure to check them out. I'll put that in the show notes page. Mississippi's Senate Bill 2248 will expand the Fresh Start Act to allow individuals with a criminal record to be eligible for an occupational license if the offense is unrelated to the license. This is another good thing. I mean, what we see a lot of times is those with a felony or something on their record can get an occupational license for things that they know how to do, and then they turn back to that life of crime and that raises the recidivism rate. And so that's another key area that occupational licensing is blocking people from reaching their hopes and dreams and actually stifling or making it to where it's even worse, okay? Michigan can pass universal licensing or reciprocity, recognizing occupational licensing earned in other states. There's a lot of big things I think that should be done when it comes to AI and technology, unleashing it, as I've been talking about for a while now. But also occupational licensing is one of the key labor market regulations holding people back, along with the minimum wage, okay? Number 5 big policy issue is increase affordable options for American families. The main cost right now, and this contributed to the election results in November, have been the huge inflation that we've had over the last few years, right? And this is raising the cost for goods and services, healthcare, energy, just so many things are going up. Look, states can pass legislation that makes significant portions of a family's budget when it comes to housing, energy, and healthcare more affordable. States can make these essential areas more affordable and continue to attract people to start businesses, work, and raise families by adhering to free market principles, reducing unnecessary regulations, and so much more. So there's a lot of states that are already looking at this stuff, but I think on the housing front, we need to have zoning reforms, removing minimum lot sizes and parking limits to allow for more housing development. Look, if you have a demand and supply problem, you need to unleash supply. That will help bring down prices. You have inflationary pressures that have created a housing market bubble, I think, overall. But there are ways that the state, even if they can't control the money supply and everything that's happening out of DC and all the bad stuff there, they can control some of the stuff at the state and local level to unleash the housing market advances that we see. We're already seeing some reforms that are happening in Texas and Washington, and hopefully many more across the country. When it comes to energy, I think there's also a key part here that we need energy abundance, whether it's the data mining centers and AI abundance that's happening across the country. We also need energy abundance. And this really should be a focus on fossil fuels that allows for reliable, dispatchable energy across the country. And wind and solar, right? Renewables where possible. This kind of the green energy agenda, though, has pushed them too much and pushed too much taxpayer money to those. What we need to do is have less government involvement in the energy market and allow the market prices to work to allocate resources versus a top-down government approach. That's socialism. We don't need that. And it's hurting the energy markets across the country. And we also don't need these Texas energy funds that's pumping in billions of dollars of low-interest loans to natural gas projects and other related projects in Texas. They're already talking about adding another $5 billion of this. This is just bad news. Let's get nuclear power going. Let's get small modular reactors, these sort of things, and we'll be in a much better position with energy abundance. North Carolina has an opportunity for reform energy policies, as they've been talking about a lot of this in energy abundance overall. North Dakota is considering a bill allowing data mining. A new meta-analysis paper by the Cardinal Institute in West Virginia again examines the effectiveness of certificate of need laws, finding that they rarely delivered on their promises and their results. And then that's the other key part of this is so we have housing, we have energy costs, and we have healthcare costs that are really driving a wedge in people's budgets. And the certificate of need laws basically say, hey, in this particular area, is there a need for a new hospital? Well, the government should be planning things like that. That should be up to the market and the private sector. And so we should be getting rid of these certificate need laws. This is a great meta-analysis paper that highlights the need for that as well. Idaho's House Bill 138 requires 11 Medicaid policy changes or the repeal of Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion was bad news, right? Indiana's SB 2 will make major changes to the state Medicaid expansion program as well. Those states that haven't expanded are doing better, having lower costs and everything else than those that have expanded Medicaid. And Medicaid doesn't really help a lot of people in the sense that doctors aren't accepting new Medicaid patients. And I think ultimately we need are block grants from the federal government to allow for flexibility and innovation to take place across the states and let them do what's going to be best for their residents. I mean, ultimately what we need is less poverty and more people will have opportunity. But if the more we could bring together patients and doctors again and have market exchanges in healthcare and get the middleman out of the way, whether it's private insurance companies or mainly the government, that's the major problem here. We'll be in a much better situation with lower prices, better quality, and just better improvements in standard of living overall. And so I think these are the key things that we need to look at. So if you want more solutions for policy wins in the state, check out my policy guide that I'll put in the show notes page. I've got this for the states and for the federal government. And a lot of this applies to local governments as well. They should be spending less, regulating less, and doing a lot less overall. So that way we have more opportunities to prosper. Please go check out my website at vanceginn.com and check out my newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. There's a lot of great information that you don't want to miss. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.